Welcome to Interview Connections. We're the first ever podcast booking agency. I'm Jessica Rhodes, the founder. And 12 years ago in 2013, I started booking my dad as a guest on podcasts because I wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And fast forward to today, we're a multi-seven-figure agency. We've worked with over 800 clients. We've booked more than 30,000 podcast interviews. And this podcast is all of our top lessons from the last 12 years, booking entrepreneurs on podcasts, scaling our company to be multi-seven figures a year, distilled down into bite-sized topics and episodes to help you learn from us. I co-host this show with Interview Connections co-owner and CEO, Margie. And without further ado, let's dive into today's episode.
In today's episode, we are talking about the number one thing you should not do as a podcast guest.
Never, ever do this. You will make it weird.
You will make it weird. And that thing is hard selling.
Ew.
It's not. And we love sales. We are from a door-to-door fundraising background. We knock on doors. We ask people for checks. Like Jess has done millions and millions of dollars in sales for Interview Connections.
13 million career to date, actually.
13 million career to date. We love a sale, but it's really important to read the room. And podcast interviews are not the place to bring your incredible sales skills.
Yes, they're not the place. Absolutely. So hard selling, it will destroy your credibility with podcast hosts and their audiences because it is an unspoken rule in the podcast community. Like really what our podcast is doing for you is like, we're kind of taking you backstage and we're like, okay, like here's how to not mess it up. Here's how to go out there and crush it. And like these are the do's, these are the don'ts as a podcast guest. So what we are telling you in this episode that please listen to us, do not go get on podcasts and start hard selling. Like you will mess it up. You will make it weird. Hosts won't like you. They'll blacklist you. They'll tell all their friends. Don't hard sell on podcasts.
Now that we've scared you really
scared
thoroughly,
straight.
Yeah. Let's talk about why and what you can do instead. So why should you not hard sell on a podcast? Jess just went into this. It's an unspoken rule in the podcast community. So we get it. We work with entrepreneurs who are crushing it. They're making 7, 8 figures in their business. They're incredible with what they do. Their clients love them, but they're not part of the podcast community. They are new to it. And so they're coming into a podcast the way they would a summit or a webinar. But there's some very key differences in the podcast community. And one of the big ones is that you do not hard sell on somebody's podcast. And so no shade if you're an entrepreneur who's just new to this and you didn't know that. That's why we're doing this. That's why we're telling you this is different than a webinar. This is different than a summit. So one of the big reasons is podcast hosts put a lot of love and care into their show. Like you want to show respect as a guest of their show. And it takes a lot as people who have had multiple podcasts that we have quit, and some of them were really good. It takes a lot to stick with a show. If this person is consistently making this show, finding guests, marketing this show, this is a labor of love. It means a lot to them. And so the way to a podcaster's heart is to care about their show and to care about their audience and to want the audience to love the show. They will love that. The opposite of that is to come in looking at what can I get? How can I get as much money from this audience as possible? And you're not getting value. That's going to be a very unpopular episode. It's pretty likely that the host won't even release the episode. So it's not a good use of either of your time. You are not paying the host to advertise. This is not an infomercial. You can do something like that on your own platform if you want to, but when you're a guest on someone else's platform, a good rule of thumb is that you want to be giving value to their audience and you want to lead with that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about the best way to position yourself so listeners take action, because if you are marketing correctly, and podcast guesting is a marketing strategy, not advertising, they are two different things. If you're marketing correctly, the audience who is consuming that content, who is listening to your podcast appearance, they're going to be drawn to you. Like you will magnetically attract them to you if you do this correctly. You don't have to hard sell in order to get listeners to want to reach out to you and inquire about working with you. So, number one, give value. Give value. I actually just had a consultation call this morning, and I won't go into the details of what it was about, but he goes, "There's 5 steps. There's 5 steps to solve this problem I'm going to talk about." And I said, "Will you share the 5 steps on the podcast?" He goes, "Nope, that's in my book." And I was like, "This is going to be a tough road, my man. You are not going to give the solution." So if you've got 5 steps, a methodology, a strategy, be prepared to pull back the curtain and share and give value. If there's any point where you're on a podcast and you're like, here's the problem, here's the information, let me reveal to you, like a webinar that's just like, let me reveal to you the why and the problem, and that's time. You need to go buy something to learn the solution. That's not the vibe of a podcast. A podcast should feel like a masterclass. It should feel like something where the listener walks away and they're like, that was so valuable.
Yes. And so to be clear, of course, there's stuff that you don't give away for free, right? There's a reason your clients pay you, and that is for service or whatever it is. So we're not saying that listening to your podcast has to be the same as a client who's paying you $50,000 a year. But we are saying I think Alex Hormozy is someone who does this really well. And whenever I've shared his podcast with people, they cannot believe it's free because they're saying, I'm getting so much value from this free piece of content that is not behind a paywall. And that makes me want more. I want to buy his book. So he has really mastered this. I think he's a really good person to look at if you're a little bit stuck on giving value. But that mindset of I really want to serve, they can feel it. It's an energetic thing as much as it's a strategic thing. And what this looks like for us. So, Interview Connections, we book entrepreneurs on podcasts, right? So, we don't teach how to pitch yourself to podcasts when we go on a podcast, right? Because you want to give value, but it has to be aligned value. We are speaking to our ideal client who is someone who wants us to pitch them to a podcast. They don't want to use the time to figure out how to do it. They want to just go to the best, have them do it, take that off their plate fully. They show up for the interview, give their brilliance, get incredible ROI, make great relationships. So when we say give value, we're not saying we go on and we're saying this is exactly how our booking agents find the perfect shows and reach out to them if you want to start pitching yourself. We're giving value for the right person. So we might be giving value about how to repurpose your podcast episodes. We might give value on how to show up really powerfully on a podcast. So we're giving value that people, our ideal client, can take and use and get results from, but we're not giving value in a way that is cannibalizing our own service and talking to people who aren't our ideal audience.
Yeah, I love that. One of our clients, Timothy Wingate Jr., is a construction accountant. And so when he speaks on podcasts, he'll talk about why use a construction accountant versus a general accountant. That is something that like he knows his target audience is going to hire an accountant either way. So the value is in helping them decide like what type of accountant to use. So I love that like aligned value I think is perfect. It's like what does your target audience, what is your ideal client actually want to learn about? Like, and it's perfect because our ideal client does not want to take the time to pitch themselves. So we're not going to be out there teaching that. We're going to talk about the strategy and how to actually use podcast appearances to grow and to monetize and to collaborate and all that good stuff.
Yes. Number 2, tell stories. So this is something that sets podcast guesting apart from other things. It's not purely informational. And so this is something that also takes the most practice for clients, I would say, who are really used to talking about their businesses and they can talk at a high level of expertise about what they do. But telling stories, podcast listeners want to hear your story. Listeners want to connect with you in that way. Stories are really memorable. And it's a great way for them to get to know you. And it's a great way to make the episode really valuable, which is great for your relationship with the host. And it's also great for your relationship with the audience. So just bottom line it for us. What is a story that you frequently tell on podcasts?
I frequently tell, let's see, one story that comes to mind is the first podcast interview that I ever booked for my dad. I remember I was in the kitchen, it was dinner time, I was like, I had my like little Dell laptop on the dinner table, and I had Nathan probably in a high chair, and I'm like cooking while I'm also checking my email, and I saw the booking come in. The host name is Brian Olson. I'll never forget. You never forget the early people. And I called my dad and I was like, I got you booked on a podcast. And I just remember that excitement. And so that's a story that I tell on podcasts. And just to pull back the curtain, it's like bring people into the room, you know, tell them like, where were you? What was the feeling? What was the setting? Because I'm sure you all, as I shared that story, kind of imagined like maybe you pictured your kitchen or you imagined some kitchen, but bring people into a moment where they can feel the emotion with you. Because that's really the point of the stories, is to bring some emotion into the conversation.
Yes. And we say this all the time, but it takes practice, right? If you're like, how do I do this? We can tell you how to do it, but the way that you're going to get good at doing it is by actually doing it and practicing it. And I will add that on Slack, we still do celebrate. Like the team will post, oh, I got this booking for this
Yeah.
client. And we still do 12 years later. There's a lot of celebration. So that has continued in the spirit of the business.
Yeah, and I do like how podcasts, like when clients are like, "Well, how do I know what stories to share?" There is an element of preparation and coming up with ideas of stories, but a lot of the stories that I share on podcasts, I never could have prepared because like I forgot about them until a question unlocked that memory. And then I'm like, "Oh my gosh, like your question just made me think of this story," you know? So you do just have to be out there getting interviewed and be really present and in the moment, turn off your distractions, be well hydrated, and just be very like it's about mindfulness. When you're really present in that conversation, there will be stories that come to mind that you hadn't thought of in a while just because you're, you know, in tune with the host.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like the more podcast episodes you do, the more stories you're going to have. So if you have not done much podcast guesting and you're like, I don't have a lot of stories, you will get more the more that you do it. Key stories are like the founding of your business, right? Can you bring them like Jess did into a moment at the conception of your business? And there's so many different places you could drop them in, but play around with that, like dropping them in different places, starting the story in different places, telling different stories as the host kind of brings up things that prompt them. And the more that you do that, the better that you will get and the more confident that you'll get.
Yeah. And then just one more tip there. I know we kind of talked about it already, but especially for my doers, you know, if you're a doer like me and you talk a lot, like you give a lot of tactics, use stories to bring a little bit of emotion into it. I just want to echo that even though I was just talking about that because like when what you're talking about is like very cerebral and like very much like how to, people are just like, yeah, I get it. Like makes sense. But what moves people to actually take action and make a decision and like that magnetic pull comes from emotion. And so share your emotions in the story. Like when you're telling the story, like I felt this and I was like, ah, like just bring the emotion into the story so it's not like and then this happened and then this happened and now we're here. You know, that's kind of like surface level and boring. So just bring the emotion into it.
Okay. And the third way to position yourself so listeners take action is be authentic. I know that this is a buzzword and I know this word is overused, but sometimes it's the best word to get across what we want to get across. And that is what's happening right now. Be authentic, be yourself. How do you do that? A big part of it is you have to get less nervous, which means that you have to practice. Like you're not going to be your most authentic self the first interview you ever do when you're nervous. You just got to keep going and you'll see, oh, I felt like I really had a breakthrough there, or I felt like that felt very authentic. And sometimes it's not linear progress. Personally, I'll say I've had interviews where I was just in the zone and I was like, wow, that was so authentic. I've had interviews after that, even with experience, where I was like, that felt a little more forced. It didn't feel so. It's not about being perfect, but striving to be yourself. Podcast interviews are such a great way to humanize your business because, as we've talked about, it's an opportunity to get to know you and to get to trust you. And in order to magnetize the people who are the right fit for you, you have to be yourself and be present. I think a tactic for this that is really helpful, and you can write it on a post it note, is if you're getting kind of anxious and you're talking to the host and you're really high in your head, can I feel my feet right now? I know you just did it too. And you can put that on a post it note if it helps you come back into your body, come back into the moment, and don't beat yourself up if you're not totally there every time. But the more you do it, the more you build that muscle, the easier it will get.
All right. So now that you've done everything correctly, you're not hard selling, you're giving value, you're telling stories and being authentic. What do you say at the end of a podcast? Because you don't just want to do all that and then hope your listeners know where to find you online. There is a strategy at the end. There is an alternative solution to hard selling, and it is to give a call to action, something that is free and low cost. So, what's going to happen at the end of a podcast interview is the host will say, where can our listeners connect with you? Where can they learn more about your business and what you offer? And that's where you want to give one direction, one thing that you want the listeners to do in order to honestly, in order to enter your funnel. Like it's, you have a marketing funnel, podcast appearances are top of funnel brand awareness. This is where you're getting visibility to people for the first time. And ultimately, if you want people to become your client, they need to go into your funnel and then work their way down. And so, what is that offer that you can make that's going to have them enter your funnel? So for a lot of people, it's a lead magnet. Like when I go get interviewed on podcasts, I'll offer our podcast interview prep checklist and I'll say you can find it at interviewconnections.com/prep. And so it's just a simple landing page where people can opt in and get a 4-page checklist. So anyone that's heard me talk about podcast guesting is likely going to be interested in an actual checklist to help them implement those tips. For other clients, they're giving like a consultation or discovery session, or maybe, telling people about their Facebook group community where they have weekly live trainings. So you want to look at your marketing strategy. What is the intentional journey of bringing somebody to getting to know you for the first time to ultimately becoming your client, and giving an offer, something that's free and valuable, so that once they get that offer, they're kind of in your ecosystem and they're in your community.
Yes. And don't overthink this. And like everything, it will evolve. So the more that you do this, the better that you will get. Our call to action has changed so much over 12 years. Our clients' call to action often changes as well. And there's so many different things. Like people have been as simple as like email me or book a call, quizzes, find me on LinkedIn. There's just so many things. There's not one right answer. It's really helpful to test it. I think a good rule of thumb is if you have something that's already working, connect it with that, right? If you have a quiz already that people love, plug them in. If you host your own podcast and you know that you convert clients from that podcast, give your own podcast and listening to that as a call to action. Like, don't overthink it. What is the way that when people hear about you, they first connect with you that's already working well, and plug it into that?
I love it. So if you want to experience what it looks like when people hear us on a podcast and opt in and get that checklist, go to interviewconnections.com/prep, because the best way to learn is actually to experience like what we're doing. So take this advice, create a call to action, but I would also encourage you to go get that checklist so you can see what the experience is, because we'll be reaching out to you. Like you'll get an email from our team. Like there's a whole experience that comes. So I would love for you to go on that journey, go on that magic school bus ride through the Interview Connections journey.
Love it.